do the countdown thing. All right. I always have to make sure we're live on Facebook too, because I will.
That's where I'm going. We're live.
Okay. We're live. All right. Good stuff. Welcome to another edition of the podcast. This is actually a junkie open because I have a whole intro and everything. We're gonna get to play it, but we're going live now. I want to just thank everybody for being here. We are starting a little bit late, but that's okay. If you're watching us on a replay, it won't even matter to you. We're getting in and we're going hard. So I'm super excited today to have our guest for the show, George Bryant. I can't wait to read his intro because he's got such an amazing story. The bio probably won't even do him justice. But for those of you who are watching this, we're starting another 2.0 version of Power Lunch where we're taking it up a notch. We're getting in even deeper with great art, great guests and who have great stories to tell. And we really want to empower people to be able to make the most of what they're building in their lives and in their businesses. And we've got a tremendous opportunity here today to share that with you today. For those of you who are not yet a member of the Facebook group, 7-Figure Circle, $1 Million Mastermind, you can hop on over to my page, click the link there. That will take you directly there, my profile banner. We service 6 and 7-figure entrepreneurs who want to scale to 7 and 8 figures and beyond. But really, it's more about the life that you want to build, the impact that you want to have. And so if you are that type of person, then absolutely, this is the place for you. Let me introduce our guest for today. I'll tell you a little bit about him, and then we're going to get into it because he's got an incredible story. We already decided there's going to be a part 1 and a part 2 and potentially a part 5 if I can get him to come back that many times.
Just make this a docuseries, man. We might as well just turn it to Netflix. Like, I'm game.
There you go. I'm all for it. So short story, George Bryant is a New York Times bestselling author, top-ranking podcast host, and one of the most highly sought-after digital marketing consultants in the world. George is described by well-known entrepreneur Mike Dillard as the single best marketer in the world right now. Others describe him as the teddy bear of truth or the crazy bald dude with pink shoes. He does, in fact, eat chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast. Sounds like my house on Sunday mornings. And isn't afraid to push you to be your best self. Having helped scale some of the largest companies in the world, George is the industry's best kept secret. With a no BS approach, George is dedicated to empowering entrepreneurs just like you to deepen their love affair with their customers. Through his relationship-first approach to business and marketing, you will ethically scale your business in the transactional world with ease. Please welcome with me none other than our guest for today, Mr. George Bryant. George,
thanks
great
for
to have
having
you
me.
here.
I'm
Absolutely.
stoked. I'm stoked. I had the pleasure of meeting you too. So like, I'm really honored to be here.
Yes, we met at Michael Faber's Movement Makers Live. I got the opportunity to hear you speak, and I'd heard about you before, but I did not know you and the way that I've come to know you. I'm really enjoying that process. Family man, entrepreneur, a lover of people. Mm-hmm. What you poured into the audience that weekend was so amazing. I took so many pages of notes, and I've been really diving into that stuff. I'm actually teaching micro versions of it to embedding it in my head as well. So, but before I'm jumping ahead because I want to kind of let people get to know you a little bit. Mm-hmm. George, tell us a little bit about where you were from and your upbringing as a child. How did that set the foundation for who you've become today?
Yeah, man. You hear that thing is like you either become them or you do the opposite of them. And I don't think I knew as a child which one it was going to be. But yeah, I grew up in right outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And I'll start with this. I've done a lot of healing in my life. And so I have a deep level of love and respect for my parents. And so what I'm about to share comes from a place of story and all is well. But it was a pretty rough growing up. A lot of drug abuse, sexual abuse, not from the family, from people outside of the family, physical abuse, disconnection, fighting. I mean, like pure turmoil. Like combat felt easy to me compared to my childhood. And so it was a lot in the home front. And then because of that, we moved a lot. We didn't have a lot of money. We were kind of like, lower class, and I got bullied a lot. I was the only white kid in my class in Hartford, Connecticut for 3 years. So I had my front teeth knocked out 3 times because I had my face smashed in a desk, one in a bus window and one in the ball cage because I was white and everybody else was black. And so I got
Wow.
beat up there. And then by the time I was in junior high or high school, I think my nose had been broken 2 or 3 times from getting bullied.
Mm.
So social services was involved. I was basically homeless from like 13 on, living in cars, my friends' basements. I would rent campers on people's property. And then I started working at 13. I had a paper out at like 11, made me a little bit of money. But then when I got into like having to feed myself, I lied about my age. I got falsified working papers from high school and got a job at the ice skating rink. Had to be 15. I think I just turned 13, and I got to ride around on ice skates and yell at people to slow down. And I was literally 2 years younger than I was supposed to be. And then kept doing that. Ended up working 2-3 jobs: construction, Dunkin' Donuts, KB Toys. I would work the 6 p.m. to midnight shift at Dunkin' Donuts. I would get up in the morning and do my paper out before school. And then typically I'd get off school at 2, and like from 2 to 6, I would work at like KB Toys or somewhere part-time. And I was providing for myself, and all while getting beat up and pretty tumultuous. There was a 6-year divorce battle, custody, trial, lawsuits, restraining orders. I mean, it was hell. So I just wanted nothing to do with it. And so I knew I didn't really have any friends. I had one best friend whose family was very affluent. They never asked questions. They kind of let me hide in their basement. They'd buy me clothes if I needed it. They never asked anything. They were God's saving grace in my life, and I'm still friends with them to this day. But other than that, I had no reason to be there. And for whatever reason, as a kid who grew up in that, I never wanted to smoke. I never wanted to drink. I couldn't do drugs. I never wanted to. Like, it always felt, I think, really icky to me because I had a cause and effect association. When it was done, this was the effect on me personally, and it hurt. And so I never wanted to inflict that on anybody else, but I didn't really know what to do. And so I got the bright idea that I needed to prove it to myself, and I should try to do the hardest thing that I could find, which was join the Marine Corps. And I actually tried to join the Marine Corps, and I was denied because I was 65 pounds overweight to go to boot camp. And I was already struggling with bulimia because of sexual abuse and obviously all the bullying. And so, but it gave me a target. I ended up losing the weight and went to boot camp. And then on July 29th of 2002, I shipped off to Parris Island boot camp and then started a whole new chapter. So that was kind of like a short version of how my childhood was.
Well, first of all, that's an intense short version. I'm curious about the 65 pounds, because how long did it take you to lose that weight? And what was
it was not healthy. I'll put it that way. It was not healthy. So I, because of what was going on in my childhood, food was my comfort, right? So I started struggling with bulimia at about 15. I had some stuff happen. I was sexually abused when I was 13, which caused some really crazy issues in me. Body image, body autonomy, awareness, like shame around just my existence. And so when I started struggling with an eating disorder, it gave me this false sense of control, right? Because everything was in my world. I had feelings, I could eat them and binge them. But then the moment I didn't want them anymore, I could purge them. And it gave me this semblance of control in a very chaotic world. And so it was a very unhealthy way to collapse my world down into I'm okay, even though now logically it doesn't make sense. But in that moment of trauma, it makes perfect sense when you have the dissonance that I had. And so I was bullied and beat up a lot for being fat, for being overweight. I mean, I was 16 years old and I wore a size 43 pant. Like it was not, I mean, like I'm a 32 now and I've been a 28 as an adult. Like it's insane. And so when I went into the recruiter's office, it was just like my childhood. They told me there's no way I could ever join. And they laughed at me.
Wow.
And that was exactly what I needed. Not that was very supportive, but I think about a month later, I came back and I'd lost like 20 pounds. And all I did was I turned my bulimia into anorexia. And I just basically ate like 500-600 calories a day. And they were like, wow, this kid actually cares. And so one of the recruiters is like, I'll help you. Help meant basically putting him on a high school wrestling program and just demolishing me. And sweatsuits, saunas, taped ankles, taped weights. Because the faster they could get me to MEPS depped in, the faster he'd hit his quota. He'd hit his job for the month. And then once I'm depped in, I don't get weighed again for like 6 months, but they needed me to hit the initial ship weight, which I think was like, I don't know, like 180 or something like that, or 170. And I was like 2 something. So they got me down in about 90 days, which obviously was not healthy at all. But once I depped in, I passed the physical. I did all that. I forged my parents' signature because I was only 17. And then I got depped in and they gave me a ship date. And so all I had to do was make it through my senior year. And I will say the benefit of all of that is though that committing to something like that changed my biology, quite frankly, like my conscious a lot, because it was like I have this potential escape, like this place to go, this thing that I can do that's going to give me something out. And so I started to take it very seriously. And so then I started to really work on myself. And I knew that if I went to boot camp and unable to do the bare minimum, like I was screwed. And so it kind of gave me an outlet, and I became a little bit orthorexic and addicted to fitness. And so I started, running every day and doing it. But naturally, I just changed a few slight eating habits, increased my activity, and I had something to direct that negative energy towards. And so it was that. And so I kept working, did all that, but I ended up losing it, and I kept it off. But I remember, I think I went to boot camp at like 181, and I think I came out at like 152 after like 13 months. I'm 5'7", 5'8", and I like my jawbones were collapsed. Like it was the crazy. I have a few pictures. And I'm just like, that I looked like Skeletor, man. Like it was like, you could like see the concaveness like in my cheeks. And it just like, there was no fat whatsoever. Like you could see the orbitals of like my eye sockets, because it was like boom, boom, boom. But I thrived in boot camp because boot camp was easy to me compared to what I had grown up in. And so I went to boot camp and I graduated first out of 1,600 recruits. I was the honor graduate for the entire time I was there, because I was like, oh, you want to beat me? Go ahead. I was like, oh, you want more? I'm like, oh, I got you. They're like, oh, you think you can break me? I was like, try. And so like, it was just this go, 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 go. Not that that was a healthy thing. It took me many years of therapy to let that go and be healthy, but it served its purpose at the time. And so that's kind of how I got there.
Man, that is incredible. I'm thinking about the emotional shift, and you talked just a second ago about going through therapy, but I know for a lot of entrepreneurs, and we often have a lot of trauma that's been unresolved. People have in different ways to deal with it. And sometimes entrepreneurs channel that into their business and their mindset. So the whole hustle and grind mindset really, really kind of feeds into that sort of coping mechanism that people have built around their trauma. How did you, because I'm curious, we haven't really talked about a transition, but I'll jump here anyway.
Yeah, we'll jump.
When you were building the business, were there parts of that helped you to grow your businesses faster because you could put that work ethic around that sort of mindset?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So in my opinion, entrepreneurship is one of the most celebrated addictions on the planet. And to answer your question, the answer is yes, but a lot of people forget to ask what the consequences or the cost is.
Right.
And so, yes, I was able to build my business faster, become successful faster, but there was a trail of dead bodies and emotional damage left behind me from gaslighting people and narcissism and disconnection, and at the sacrifice of my soul. And I had the fortunate pleasure of learning very early that when the number in the bank account gets to where you thought it would never be, that it still doesn't change anything on the inside of your soul.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it took me losing it all again, quite a few times before the work was really done. And you can't out hustle a bad relationship with yourself. And so now in hindsight, 21 years later, it's really, really easy to think about. But yeah, it was crazy to me because when in entrepreneurship, when living with that unresolved trauma, and when I got out of the Marine Corps, like we'll skip a little bit, but like 13 years of combat, 3 combat tours, I witnessed 3 suicides, I lost 28 Marines. I've seen things happen to people that nobody should ever have to experience. And I would come out and I was like, oh, I don't want to feel this. Let me work till 2 a.m. Let me make a video every day. Let me go do this. Right. And then what's crazy is that I was edified and celebrated for being disconnected and rewarded financially for doing so, because everybody wanted to celebrate the highlight reel without ever asking what the collateral damage was to the people that were around me. Right. And I think that was one of the hardest parts to think about now, like the amount of damage that I did to my wife, to my friends, to my team members, to my kids, to my daughter. And it was never ill-intentioned, but it was never also held accountable, because I didn't have anybody shine a mirror up or hold a mirror up for me. And I didn't have the emotional intelligence and the awareness because I was running from my trauma. I didn't realize that I was in the pill bottle, not being able to see the label. And so now it's really, really interesting because I have such a different perspective that like everything I do is transaction last, right? Like the result is a byproduct of like alignment and intention, not boom, like we were talking about this quickly before we recorded. And so what I think is very, very powerful though, is to have an awareness, because I don't think trauma is bad. I think unrecognized, unacknowledged, and unhealed trauma is bad, because trauma becomes a tool once it's acknowledged and healed.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's pretended like it's not there, or like, I'm going to show them all, or I'm going to prove them all wrong. And I was like, well, yeah, this is the worst part, because you're going to get there temporarily, and then you're going to go deeper back down than you ever started, because it's not sustainable there. And so it was crazy. And I would say this very honestly, I'm massively successful. I have everything I've ever wanted in my life. I'm good. Like, I am good. But it wasn't until probably about 3 years ago that I really, truly understood all of this, to this perspective of like, wow, there's so much more work I get to do, and so much more awareness, and there's levels to this game. But it's sneaky, right? Because like, we live in a culture that's bred on disconnection, on ultra consumerism, on the endless scroll, the endless timeline, like go, 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 go. Like, we're entrepreneurs. Your to-do list will never, it's like pie. It never stops. It's infinity. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's never going to. And people think they implore this toxic thinking. Well, I'll go hang out with my family when I'll start on Monday. I'll do this when. And I was like, but when comes, the only thing you have is a regret on your deathbed that never goes away and has no cure. And it's not then, it's now. And I think that was like, it took me really like 3 years. I think it was when my son was like 2, he just turned 2. And like, I speak for a living. I'm on the road, 160 flights in a year. And I was like, it got to the point where I looked at my son, and my son said, "Daddy, don't go." And I was like, a 2-year-old acknowledging how addicted I am to this, and what am I gaining? Because I tell everybody as an entrepreneur that I want 3 things, just like everybody else. What I want: time, money, and energy, right? But yet, when I have the choice to take them right in front of me, they're the first things that I advocate to go back and hustle and be disconnected from the things that I said that I wanted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I started to get really, really challenged, because things weren't working anymore, right? It was like, oh, I'd hit the same level. I'd hit the same cap. Like, making $1 million is easy for me. Like, it's like rinse and repeat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, but why is it always that? Like, why isn't it not breaking? Why isn't it like, why does it feel hard? And I was like, oh, because rather than me changing me and up-leveling my game and changing the athlete that I am in that analogy, and changing my capacity and my skill set, I stay the same, and I try to put it on the business, and I go back to the same hustle and grind and the same hustle and grind. But it's every new level requires a new identity. That's why I love James Clear in Atomic Habits. He's like, you go set a thing like, I'm going to go run 5 miles. You'll never make it and sustain it. He's like, but if you change your identity to, I'm a runner, what would a runner do? Well, a runner would have his shoes out in the morning. He would eat this way. You'll be running a marathon before you know it, not because you wanted to run a marathon, but because you changed your identity. And in entrepreneurship, I think people get into entrepreneurship for 1 or 2 reasons. Perfectly clear. Number 1 is that they have this trauma or this background that's created a void and a problem in their life. And then they're going to use entrepreneurship to heal themselves while also healing other people through that experience.
Right.
And then the other side of it is that you were blessed with the ability of vision to see people for what they were. And then you create a solution to empower them because you'd already done it in the first place. But it's really like only one of those 2. And each one of them, entrepreneurship is the fastest therapy that you'll ever get in your life, right? No matter what you do, the only way to hide from it is to intentionally hide from it. But if you pay attention, it's a step-by-step roadmap to growth and success and to where you want to go. And so, yeah, I think it's crazy how much there's celebration around how disconnected people are. Like, they're like, oh my God, I'm so stoked. Like, he worked 22 hours that day. And I was like, and his 3-year-old girl's going to wonder why her husband's never home and why she chose a man that made work more important than her. And I was like, I can't celebrate that. And I was like, and I used to tell my wife, I'm not coming to bed. And she's like, babe, it's 10. I'm like, no. And I'd stay up till 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. And it's like, I get emotional thinking about all the times that she was right and my kids were right and I made them wrong, because I refuse to feel the pain of myself. I refuse to be with myself. And I think what gets me the most is that we're even complicit in allowing the dissonance to continue, because every time we engage with it, it tells them it's the right move. And they're complacent in continuing it, but we're complicit in consuming it. Every time we, yeah, man, go do it. And rather than, hey, do you really need to work 4 more hours today? Or like, do you really need to be on your phone with your kids? Or do you really think that you can't? Like, And so I think there's like this double-edged sword, and the byproduct is this evil that's celebrated. And then we have this addiction that hides in plain sight. And I'd say it's no different than alcohol, one of the most dangerous drugs on the planet that is celebrated and mixed with entrepreneurship. It's game over, right? Like, and so I think that was a big part of it. And so now it's really, really crazy because my team's like, let's do it. I'm like, let's do it. I was like, you get an hour for me today. And they're like, great. You want to know what's funny? I get more done in 3 hours of a day now than I used to get done in 3 weeks because there's no room for ambiguity. It's all focus. It's all intention. It's like, oh, no, this creates this. This creates this. Nope, no space for that. No space for that. This creates this. And I think that's what it really boils down to. It's every day asking yourself, like, who do I want to be today? And then not from a place of transaction, right? Or how much more revenue's in the bank or what result you're getting, because those are byproducts of your intention and your inputs combined together.
Yeah.
Like, my intention is to be a good husband today. I'm like, awesome. What does that look like? I'm like, I'm going to sit down with my wife, make eye contact, match her breathing, and ask her how her day was. I'm going to go out of my way to clean the backup camera off her truck every morning when I walk onto the driveway. I'm going to make sure that when she comes home, even though she doesn't expect me to, that I have dinner waiting or the kids handled, right? And it's like the intention plus the action aligned with it creates a result that's almost immeasurable. And it comes down to it. But there's no way, and you know this better than anybody, where our wives are mad at us and they want us to go check a list and get things done to fix it. They're like, that only makes it worse. Like, no, I want you to be different. I just want you to listen. And so I think about entrepreneurship the same way. I think about business the same way. Like, one of my philosophies every morning is that I lost everything I had when I went to bed. So when I wake up every morning, my wife is gone, my kids are gone, my team is gone, my customers are gone, and all 8 of my companies are gone. And that's how I start my day. And I'm like, who do I get to be today to earn them all back? Wow. And to earn them all back. And when I have that, and I'm connected to that, there's not an ounce of my day that is hustle, grind, disconnect. And somehow it feels like the Energizer Bunny stuck a battery up my ass and I have an unlimited gas tank to go because it's fully aligned. There's nothing missing. There's nothing there. And so, yeah. And I say this too, because I think that there's a little gap that can come in here, right? I have a wife, I have kids, right? I have one of my best friends, him and his wife are never going to have kids. They are both entrepreneurs and they love it. It fills their bucket to work at that level, but it's not from a place of avoidance or distraction. It's from a place of choice because they can. And like, we do amazing together, right? And so I think like I'm sharing my experience, but I think what it really boils down to is being fully aware as to why we're doing it, right? And I know for me, there were many nights I was working while I was just watching YouTube videos, or I was looking for inspiration when I was avoiding relationship with my family, right? Or I was hustling and grinding, which meant hiding in my office where nobody saw because I could do in 10 minutes what most people took 2 hours. And then I spent the other hour and 50 minutes being depressed and self-loathing, right? Yeah. And I think that that's where we really, really get into the game of the awareness that makes a difference. And so I think it's a superpower, but like any superpower, it has to be harnessed. It has to be respected. It can't be abused. And there's a polarity on the other side of it as well.
George, I mean, in the 10 or 15 minutes that you just shared that, I think that you may have broken some people's world in the right way. Here's the thing. And when I have people on the show, I like to have them tell their personal story so people can see the human side of the success. So people can see that it can happen. It's possible for them. Right.
Yep.
But the other part of that is that sometimes people don't believe you unless the number is big enough. Right. And I know enough about you to know that you are massively successful. Right. Mm-hmm. You have made a ton of money. Right. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, so there's some people who can't even hear you and believe you until they know what the number is and what that success story is. The flip side of that, though, is that when you made so much money, they can't connect with the fact that, well, where I am, can I get to where you are without being who I've had to be all this time, with all the trauma, with all the hustle. So let's talk a little bit about your journey first, because I want to circle around and then show people how they can actually get greater results by doing what you're talking about now, but they have a little bit of context of what you built, and now you have a little bit more hindsight to be able to bridge that gap if you can.
Totally. I want to do one cliff note or one footnote for you really quickly, because there's a very important part. I made millions, but I lost it every single time until I changed. So everything that's lasted has only lasted after I changed, which required being rebuilt from the ground up with a different skill set and a different tool with the right intention. And so I never made FU money or stupid money from a bad place that I got to keep, because every time I did, I lost it every single time. And it wasn't until I shifted and continued to honor that shift and hone that shift that it came and it stays and it grows. And so I used to think and tell people like, oh, and I was like, wait, no, I have nothing to show for anything I achieved when I was being misaligned or hustling and grinding that I still have to this day.
Yeah.
And so it's all new money and new abundance and new success, because it only sticks when it's aligned for the right reasons. And so like, I used to think that way all the time. But then, you know, once you get under the hood of a couple $1 billion businesses and a couple centimillionaires that are your dear friends, and you realize that we all have the same story, and we're like, no, everybody thinks I made it back then. He's like, I lost all of it. I just didn't tell anybody because I went right back to work and I did it for the right reasons. So I think it's really, really, really important, because, you know, I think abundance and success is a byproduct of alignment and intention, right? And I know that sounds like really woojy and woo-woo, but it's no, like, this is who I am all the time, no matter what. Like, who you see on stage is who I am on a podcast. It's who I am with my family. It's who I am at the restaurant. It's who I am when I get a flat tire. Like, it doesn't change. And then I'm crystal clear that I want to make an impact regardless of money. And like, you've seen me do this. And no matter what, a byproduct of that alignment and that intention, when somebody else gets a result, always leads to a positive bank balance, right? And I can say that now confidently for the first time, because I used to think there was something missing for me, that like there was a skill I didn't have. There was an answer that I didn't know, or there was my favorite one, there was a secret, right? The 7 secrets, 67 steps, like shut the fuck up. Yeah. But what I realized is that I was also complicit in believing that. And as long as I believed that to be true, I kept advocating myself, my authority, my intuition, my gifts to somebody else's vision, and I was building theirs.
Yeah.
And I'd say if I take all of the success, the New York Times bestselling, the #1 app in the world, like my backpack company just passed $10 million organically. We'll do 100 million this year in another one of our companies. Like, it's crazy, but I don't even know those things half the time because they don't even get into my day. They're not a part of my process. They're not a part of my thought process. Like, I don't even have access to my own bank accounts. I don't know what my staff is paid. I don't know what came in, when it came in. And it's because the moment I released my attachment to finishing the race, and I realized that the only way I win is when everybody else wins, and there's no secret out there to change my humanity. All that's required is that I be a human and care about people.
Yeah.
Everything got easy. Everything. And I was like, there is no secret. The people that are selling you the secrets are selling you the secrets because they don't have them themselves. Right? But then when you believe that there's a secret, you're turning off your ability to execute your vision and your greatest gift, which is you.
Right. Right.
And what we start to understand is, like, when you get to the top of the game, like I've coached athletes, I've coached professional sports teams, no matter what, the difference between the top of the top at the Olympic level is not in skill set. It's in mindset and application of skill set.
Right.
Their skills are the same.
Right.
Right. You and I have access to the same books, technically the same people, the same conferences, right? I don't care which way you slice it. An ad is an ad. Social media is social media. A video is a video. Just because you have a better camera and a production crew doesn't change the content in the video, right?
Right.
And so if we understand that all of the tools are the same, what's the secret to success? It's the person who wields the tool. But if every single time you go to pick up the tool, you doubt your ability to use it, and then you go ask somebody else how to use it, and you use it their way, you can't get upset that you created them more results and not yourself. And that's the biggest lesson that I learned, is that there is no secret to be me. There is no secret to run my business. There's no secret to run my team. There's only my way that feels fully aligned to who I am. And so, like, I have to say that because I think it's really, really easy to skip it. But I mean, even during COVID, I lost $500,000 a month in monthly recurring revenue, 2 companies, and $1.5 million in accounts receivable contracts in 35 days. Like everything. And by the way, that was right after I just bought a brand new multi-million-dollar second home, 2 brand new BMWs, and 3 horses for my wife. Right? Because everything's great, right? Like my bills are paid, my staff's paid, my taxes are paid. I got 600 something coming in every month. I was like, oh, that's like less than 5% of it. Whatever, let's go. And then it's gone. Right? And not gone to be recovered, gone to be 2 companies closed, all of that left. I shifted my entire business model, sunsetted a mastermind, and sat there for 90 days trying to stay alive with a mortgage in the second house I'm now living in that I was like, well, why did I do this? To being like, wait, wrong mindset. How do I thrive in this? And what's missing? And it wasn't how do I fix something? It's how do I rebuild this from the ground up because the world is demanding I do it differently. And what's crazy is I didn't do one thing to generate revenue. I launched a podcast from the ground up with no following. And I did 3 episodes a week, every week for the first like 52 weeks. And all I did was talk and talk and help and help and help. And somehow success leaves clues because I went back to my toolbox, made the holder, and all of a sudden everything I lost is back, but it's back better. It's back easier. It's back there. And so I think it's really, really important for context because everything I made doing it the wrong way were just painful lessons and reminders that I keep with me today to make sure that I don't repeat those same mistakes.
I'm curious, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day because we all pretty much know the beginning of the pandemic.
Yep.
There is no quote unquote hard end date. Some people just decided it's over. Some people are still in the middle of it. Some people are still wrestling with they're sick. I hear people getting COVID all the time.
Yeah.
But the residual effects of it, that collective trauma that we all went through, because it shifted so many people's lives in so many different ways. And you talked about it there, that you lost, everything that you had built to that point. You had already rebuilt yourself to get the success. You're at a place where you're good. And then you had to shift and do it differently. But are you finding or still discovering any lingering effects from that in terms of your mindset, in terms of anxieties or fears? Or are there things that come up sometimes you think, oh, I thought I was done with that,
Yeah, I think the biggest thing and probably the reason I adopted the mindset of I lose it all every day, because that's a factual thing that could happen. Because there's things that I can control and there's things that are out of my control. Like no matter how good I am, I can't control what you do with your credit card, no matter what I do. I can't. Right. I can't control what you do with your family, your business, no anything. So I feel like what it gave me was it gave me a very, very accurate, honest portrayal of what I believed to be true that is not true. Like I was living with rose-colored glasses. Like just because you built it, it stays. No. Once you build it, you have to earn it even more every single day or it goes away. And I feel like a lot of businesses and a lot of people were skimping by, myself included, on my morals, on my merits, on my previous relationships of the things that worked. And I was like, yeah, but just because I played varsity high school football doesn't mean I can put my jacket on today and go run on the field. I'm going to get smoked. Right. Just because my business worked yesterday doesn't mean it's going to work today. And I think that it's been a very, very fresh perspective because that was probably one of the most sobering parts of all of it. Because of course I got to a point, I was like, oh man, like not that I was coasting, but I was like, oh, this is easy. This is predictable. And the moment the resistance went away, everything was gone. And so it's really, really beautiful, but I can tell you how my week and month is going to go based on how uncomfortable I make myself every day.
So now that's a very interesting thing too. Talk a little bit about, because we were talking before we started about alignment. Yeah. You mentioned that a lot. It's a core facet of how you live your life and how you run your businesses. Yeah. But how do you stay in alignment and yet don't become complacent? Because alignment makes things easier. But when it's easy, sometimes we get comfortable.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, alignment is this in line with who I want to become in the future, the man I want to be, the husband I want to be, the business owner I want to be. And so when I say that, it's like, I won't sacrifice. Like you will never see me sell on stage. You will never see me do certain things in business. Like I will never do certain things because they're misaligned. But in that alignment, I protect growth over death, and death is doing nothing. Stagnation equals death. And quite frankly, I attempted my life, and the day that I survived, I made a decision that I would never do it again, which means I can't slowly die either. And so every day has to be about growth. And what that means is like, how can I find 3 more people that day? Not out of alignment, but that are aligned to my morals and values. How can I pour more into my team that day? How can I pour more into my customer that day? How can I pour more into this podcast today, to where like my whole day today was designed so my bucket's full. So for the 4 podcasts I do today, they get 100% of me and all of me. Yeah. Like my Oura ring went off an hour and a half ago, said you've reached your activity goal for the day. And I was like, it's 11 a.m. Right. But like I burn like 500 calories a podcast because I move and I'm in and I'm like, my heart rate's up because I'm ready to go. And so what that typically means for me is that like when I feel stagnant, it's out of alignment for me. Like I can tell you the amount of shows on Netflix I can watch in a week before I start to get depressed. Right. Like there's things that I do. Like I love watching the show alone with my wife. Like I love it. It comes out once a week. Right. And Stranger Things is fun, but like we'll binge it in a week and then I won't touch it again until like 4 more months. But I can start to see my behaviors and my proclivities around me. And it's a perfect mirror. Right. Like last night, I'll give you a perfect example. I love a clean kitchen because I grew up in pretty crappy environments. Right. And so there's something about a clean home that makes me feel home and makes me feel safe. And we've lived in some places in Montana as we were renting, as we build and look to buy, that I didn't really feel comfortable in. And I'd come home and I'd actually leave the house disheveled, right? I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like it didn't feel like my home. Well, we moved again and it feels like my home. And so I've literally noticed every single day before bed, I clean the kitchen and I make sure when I wake up in the morning, so I'm the first one up with my son and myself, that what I walk into is this space that feels open and clean. Well, last night, after I finished dinner, I wasn't feeling good. So I just played on my phone. I played some games. I watched a YouTube video. We watched Stranger Things. I went straight to bed and I was like, I'll do the dishes in the morning. And it's so crazy because I woke up this morning with guilt. Like I felt uncomfortable. It didn't feel right. I wake up, I make my son breakfast. I go in the kitchen and I was like, took me 5 minutes to clean the dishes, load the dishwasher. And I swear to God, it's like I hit the NOS button in my car. And I was like, holy moly. And I was like, and then I thought about it, I was like, oh, because last night I wasn't feeling good. And rather than doing something to lean into it or acknowledge it, what did I do? I numbed out on my phone. And there's nothing wrong with playing games on my phone or watching YouTube on my phone, but it's the why I'm doing it that makes it different. And it's like, oh, I just want to play games. Great, play games. Like, oh, I can't wait to watch this YouTube video. Like, I love the show Hot Ones where they interview the celebrities with the hot wings. Like, I won't miss an episode. I think it's great, right? And I was like, but it's the intention underneath it. And so, like, do I ask myself, like, the business owner I want to be, like, do I impact 100 million lives or 1 billion lives by sitting on my couch and playing? I was like, no, because what could I have done? Not what should I have done, because that's a shame-based word, as Brian talks about. But what could I have done? I was like, oh, I could have done all this stuff. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I chose not to. I chose mediocrity in that moment. And that's not aligned with who I want to be. And so what did I do? I didn't beat myself up. I woke up. I was like, what feels off? No shit, man. I swear I did the dishes, had my son's breakfast, his lunch, my supplements out, my lunch packed, ready to go, made a list for the day, hit my stuff out the door, got my wife's car detailed, did everything, boom, out the door. And I was like, I'm going to destroy today now. And that's where it went. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize how simple it was to just fall out of alignment very, very quickly. And I wasn't really tired. I was emotionally drained and I didn't do anything to fill my bucket. So this morning, once the dishes were done, I was like, oh, I walked outside barefoot in Montana, did 1 minute of breath work, and I just felt so aligned again. And so for me, that's what alignment means. It's that I'm holding myself to my potential, not my current situation. And then if I find a gap in it of like, could I have done more? And I'm like, oh, maybe. And I was like, oh, no, actually what I did was perfect. Like I grade myself a 10 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10, and an 8's all I have. But it's in that reflection where I get to find the pockets where it's like, oh, like I'll give you another, I'll just be fully transparent. We're sitting in the house last night. My wife's been sick for the last 9 days. Typically she runs cold. I run hot. So I like the house colder. She's been having the house at like 64 degrees in Montana. And I was like, oh, I'm a little cold. Okay, this is interesting. And so I've been like cheating it up. And then I'm like comfortable at 70. And last night she said something like, she's like, hey, does the house feel a little bit cold? I'm like, no, it feels like it's 70, 72. And she's like, okay, cool. And I caught my response and I was like, oh, that was not like a positive response. Like it was very hard and abrupt. And it was like I was speaking to say like it's staying where it is, which is manipulative and compensatory. It's a dick move, right? And then I watched her body language change. Then I even watched her change her engagement strategy for me, but it wasn't hers to change. It was mine.
Right.
And I caught it in about 10 seconds. And then I was like, oh, I was up 4 degrees up, game over. I'll take my sweatshirt off for all I care about, right? And then I was like, oh, and then I actually even apologized for it this morning because I was like, that is not the husband that I want to be. That doesn't create safety. Yeah. That doesn't create love. That doesn't create surrender. That creates rigidity and cold reactance. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's not the example I want my son to see. That's not what I want my wife to feel. And that sure as shit, not the reason I'm on this planet. And so I was like, oh, let me make an adjustment. Not go back and apologize. Now, oh, I'm so, no, like immediate shift, and then use the new actions to edify it in. And so for me with alignment, it's finding those pockets. Like when I find myself upset of like, oh, like this happened the other day. I was like, oh, something didn't happen on my social media and I have a team member to do that. I immediately went to, I'm going to call them, figure out what the fuck happened. And I was like, wait, how about you look in the mirror and ask what was missing from you? And I did. And once I got to the answer to the question, I was like, oh, I'm not going to call at all. I'm going to make an adjustment. And once I make the adjustment, I'm going to call and acknowledge the adjustment and ask if they can support me in the adjustment. And what do you know? Beautiful, desirable result from not gaslighting a team member. And so what I think it really boils down to isn't trying to be perfect, isn't having all the answers. It's the willingness to explore whatever comes up and asking myself, like, is this me being at the tip top of my game who I want to be? And like, I'll give you an example. Like when we were at the event together, the inverse of this is that I realized that when I'm in a room of people that I don't necessarily know all the time, there's times I thrive in it, but there's other times, depending on my gas tank, that I don't. And so there were quite a few times at Michael's incredible event, I was like, oh, if somebody comes up and asks me a question right now, can I answer it? I'm like, yes. I'm like, but could I answer it in a way that I would be proud of or being in my potential self? And I was like, no, I need to go for a walk. So I went for a lot of walks because speakers trigger me too. I'm like, oh, that landed. Oh, that one hurt. And I was like, I don't want to be the guy that when you come up to me in that moment of vulnerability and you're like, man, that thing really landed. Can you help? That I'm cold or disconnected or transactional. And so like, I would go to my room and meditate. I went and ate alone. And Brian's one of my best friends. And he's like, hey man, we're going to go have dinner. I'm like, I need to have dinner by myself tonight, man. I love you. I'll see you in the morning. Right. And then an hour later, I'm like, hey, I'm back in my room. He's like, yeah, I'll come over. And then we're good. Right. But I needed that space. And so it's just this constant barometer for me, which also keeps me in action and protects where I want to go. So that would kind of be like my thoughts on that.
We're nowhere near getting into the weeds of the business and stuff like that. And I'm really good with that because this is not where I saw this heading, but I'm so glad that we went here because I think this is going to be so much more beneficial. You know this, and maybe you can speak to this in the last few minutes.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, we focus so much on the business tactics, right? And I know in working with clients, it's always, when you're coaching somebody that it's them that needs to shift, that will shift everything around their business. And you made some massive shifts. I want to go back quickly and talk about the husband piece, right? Because as a man, very much of our identity is based on the things that we build, the way that we provide, etc. But you talked a lot about the being there versus the doing, right? The honey-do lists, right, is their way of, hey, you're not present to the needs of the home. Talk about a little bit how you got there, and then we'll preface the part 2 by you just kind of maybe just teasing a little bit how it has impacted your business and the relationship aspect.
Yeah. So how I got there is my wife left me 3 times, and I slept more nights in a hotel than I did with my wife for a good period of our relationship because my wife is a goddess. And my wife has been doing hypnosis and NLP and personal development and consciousness work for like 20 years of her life. And then you get me, Mr. Broken Jarhead Marine, who kills people and thinks he's a badass and can read a book and feel better, coming into that container, and her ability to hold boundaries is how we got there. But I've always been the guy who wants to fix things, because when I was a child, fixing things meant I was safe. Because if I fixed it, you couldn't be mad at me. If you couldn't be mad at me, you couldn't beat me. And if you couldn't beat me, I was safe. And so I learned how to use actions and words to manipulate the receiving party for my safety. Well, as an adult with trauma from that situation, that becomes a disconnection metric. It's called narcissism, and some gaslighting and even some sociopathic tendencies, because it's a trauma response, right? And so I caused a lot of damage and a lot of pain, a lot of lying, a lot of dishonesty, a lot of not being forward, not sharing my feelings. Like, there was a lot that was there. But I also was running the program that the only way to be in a relationship was to check a box, because the box checked equaled safety. And so it wasn't until I dove all the way in, and I mean all the way in, we're talking years of EMDR and MDMA assisted psychotherapy and psilocybin and ayahuasca and prolonged exposure and cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive processing therapy and stem cells and Neuralink feedback and neural feedback. And I'm talking like 5-6 years of deep therapy on myself and all the modalities, that I started to realize that, like, oh, my value intrinsically has nothing to do with what I get done. It's who I choose to be. And I'd spent 36 years of my life having my identity derived from the choices I made, the mistakes I went and the amends I made, or what I was about to do, but never about who I was. And so I didn't know who I was if you didn't tell me I was good, Frederick. I didn't. If I didn't get off stage and you'd be like, George, that was a good job, then I immediately was a failure, right? Because there was no feedback to counteract the negative view. And so you've been around that energy. We've all been around that energy. It is heavy. It is like a dark storm cloud that you can sense from a mile away, right? You're like, oh my God, like everything is bad and hard. And that's how I was every single day. And luckily my wife saw a spark of a soul in me, and this little boy that like has a giant heart and a capacity for people, and just wanted to love people the way that he was never loved, but was never shown how. And so some deep men's work, some really deep stuff there. And then I'd say it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I was like, wait, the answer to any problem in life is never to do something different. It's to be different. And I was like, oh man. And then it started to kind of fall together. And it's like, now, I mean, it, of course, like it still happens every day, but I'm like, oh, like you get the trigger in your body. It's like, just be, right? A honey-do list is a testing of your ability to hold structure so that they feel safe, right? It's all about context. And so what I think about now is what I want to do and who I want to be. And I've never accomplished anything of value or anything with a desirable result in my life by checking a box, right? Like I can't go do something unless the context is there. If I just go outside and talk to a stranger, but I have no intention, it doesn't work. If I just write an email, but don't know who I'm writing it to, it's not going to work. If I design a product, but I'm not solving a problem, it's not going to work. But yet in the game of life, what tends to happen is we get affected by the outside world and we have a reaction to it. And the reaction lacks context to make what we do have any value whatsoever. Because it's an emotional based reaction due to my inability to hold discomfort because I don't know how to be in a relationship with myself or didn't. And so instead, it was easier to advocate it out, to avoid the feeling, whatever that fucking feeling is, and do something to mitigate it. And one of my greatest teachers ever, I love him. I would literally call him like, Lindsay asked me to move out. What do I do? And he's like, how do you feel? And I'm like death. And he's like, sit with it. What do you mean? He's like, just sit with it longer. And I was like, until when? He's like, until you don't feel it anymore. I'd call him every day. He's like, what do you feel? I'm like death. He's like, don't say anything. Don't do anything. Sit with it and sit with it and sit with it. And now, 10 years later, I'm like, oh, I had no emotional capacity to relate to myself or to relate to my own feelings. So instead, you give me feedback that hurts because I don't want you to give me that feedback. But instead of showing up in a manner to change it, I then go and try to do something to eliminate the hurt because I don't want to feel the hurt. and know that it affected you, which actually then negates what you told me because I'm not listening and changing it. And now I'm just repeating this vicious cycle. We call it the dance floor, right? And the only way to get off the dance floor is to hold. And when you define masculine and feminine structure, masculine is the definition of time and space. It's the master of time and space. Its job is to create a container. And in the container creates safety for the feminine to be messy and expressive. And here's what's funny. Business is masculine and customers are feminine. And so what was missing was I was trying to do the thing without ever understanding why, what container I was creating. And so now, yes, do I fuck up all the time? Yes, I do, right? Like there's only 3 colors of crayons in my box. Like I mess up as I do this, right? But it's like, oh, wait, there's nothing to do. It's just who do I want to be with my son, with my friends, right? And it's like, you know, you think about it now, like I actually use this in business all the time. Like, what do we do with our customers that like leave hate comments? I'm like, send them a DM and send them thank you and ask them how their day is. And I was like, because you do realize if somebody legitimately hated you, they wouldn't post it on your wall. The moment it gets posted on your wall, it's a test and a cry for help to break a paradigm for something you triggered that was something that somebody else did. And they're like, damn it, how do you know that? I'm like, some of my haters have become my best customers ever. And it's like, because go ahead, but like, that's not me. It has nothing to do with me, but I hold this context in this container, right? And so now when you think about it, it's like, you know this more than ever. Like, honey, I need you to do this. Like, why haven't you done this? Like the moment you respond, it's like shooting yourself in the foot, right? But the moment you listen, breathe, stay steady, and then literally repeat back what you hear, she melts because she feels safe that your structure could hold what was her fear. And then it's like, and you're like, really, that's the game the whole time? I just have to shut up and not try to fix everything? Oh, being fixes something, right? So that container is huge. Well, when you think about business, our job isn't to sell a product. It's to create a container to get a result. And it's the same principles that apply over. And so they're like, George, like, how do you not work and make $100,000 a week or have this pop up? I was like, it's not the content, it's the context. And the context comes down to the container. And so if I'm trying to change you, trying to get you to do something, trying to change what you do, that's manipulation. And it never works in my marriage. So it sure as shit isn't going to work in my business. But the moment I create a container that says, hey, man, I got you here and I'll be here till when? And I allow the expression to happen, somehow magically you always get results. And it always works. And so what it does is it takes this game of like, how do I change somebody? How do I make them think different, do something different? And instead, as Jonah Berger calls it, how do we become the catalyst for their change? And the catalyst for their change is being the witness, is creating the context to the container, creating an event room and having no agenda for what somebody does in that room, knowing that the end result is that they leave confident or happy or connected or grounded, but you allow them to get there at their own pace. Business is no different. Teams are no different. Friendships are no different. None of us like when our friends like, hey man, you're being a dick. You should do this, this, that. They're like, no, that's not friends. That's meaning our relationship is conditional on me being a certain way.
Right.
But it's like, hey man, I love you, bro. Hey, I'm going hiking. You want to go with me? Like, yeah, right. Or like, hey man, go ahead. Is this important to you? You're like, yeah, right. You create this container, you create this context, and then you invite everybody else in. We do it in relationships. We do it with our kids. Like if you have young kids, good luck trying to tell them what to do, right? Like you'll get reactance really, really quickly. Same thing with team, same thing with customers, same thing with potential customers. Is our job is to hold the context or create the container and then invite them in. And if we have the container, then they're allowed to lean into the work to create a result that we would never have the ability to help create with them in the first place.
You know, it's interesting because somebody sent me a message today and they were thanking me for our Facebook group. But she said something that was interesting. She said, it's been great to learn in a judgment-free zone. And I thought it was an interesting way, but what you just said right there kind of illustrates it, because even in our business, you can create a judgment-free zone where people feel like I can get what I need to be a better version of myself, to get the outcome that I want for my life. And because you created that container, that product, whatever it was, you allow me to do that. I got to respect your time because you've given us so much. Tell people how they can find you, connect with you, whatever. We're definitely going to have you back for part 2. But
yeah, I think the best thing is we do part 2. That's the best place. But if you're picking up any of my crazy, I'll say it this way: if there's anything I can help you with because it triggered something in you, either shoot me a DM on Facebook, which you'll see me in this right now, or shoot me a DM on Instagram with it's George Bryant. Or if you're like, I just want to learn more mindset, business, customer journey, email, I would highly recommend you check out my podcast. It's called The Mind of George Show. It's on every single podcast platform that exists. But either way, I'm here to support, here to breathe anything I can into you, here to help in any way that I can. And man, thank you from the bottom of my heart for having me today. It's been awesome.
No, the gratitude belongs to me because I think you've saved somebody's marriage, you saved their business, you may have saved their life. You definitely poured into me, and I appreciate it, George. It's been an honor getting to know you, and I look forward to more years of learning that as well.
It's just the beginning, my friend. It's just the beginning.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. For all of you, thank you for hopping in for even a second or a minute. If you're watching this in a replay, drop a replay. Let us know what you discovered through this conversation, and let George know. We definitely reach out to him, follow him in his world, because it's going to make you much more valuable and much more happy in your life as well. Once again, this is Frederick Douglass Bussey. This has been Power Lunch. Ever forward.